as in the digital world, most things are provided as a service. There's software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and therefore, going into this digitized world, we also believe that we have a broadcast as a service to be delivered to consumers and to enterprises. So in view of that, we thought we would have a conversational discussion with Shashi on what he feels is D2M and what's the roadmap for D2M in India. And practically, I think he first coined the word D2M, remember in some of our earlier discussions. And therefore, you will get a bird's eye view of what he came up with. Thanks, Shashi, for this session.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is it that, a broadcaster like PB's interest in, D2M, given the fact that there's so much investments in DTT, and as the Honorable Secretary said, there are about 19 cities with DTT towers. What prompted you to, move away from DTT to DTM?
Thank you. I think that's a very profound question. So I'm not from the broadcast background, right? I have no telecom background. I come from the world of IT and digital media. So when I came to Prasar Bharati 5 years back, what struck me was, how we were playing catch up on the technology side. And, the whole world had moved ahead and, we were where we were. And then I started attending a lot of these international broadcast events. And I found that this challenge was not unique to Prasar Bharati. Practically every other broadcaster was also grappling with the same questions. What is the way forward with the way the world has changed, the way media is being consumed. So it was very clear that unless we rethink our approach to media and how we reach the consumer, we are going to be left behind. And we have to get ahead of the technology cycle. We can't be behind the technology cycle. So one of the first decisions that we took back in 2017-18 was that we have to sunset the analog terrestrial network because huge amount of resources were going into that. Secretary INB referred to it. And it took us almost the entire last 5 years to get that phase out done. Because that now has freed up a lot of resources, assets, manpower. And so now we are in a place where, how do we now think ahead? How do we move forward? Now, sometime in between, the Doordarshan had invested in digital terrestrial systems. Again, as Secretary INB pointed out, there's hardly any takers for it in its current form. And this is operating in 19 cities. And with the manner in which consumer behavior has changed in India, first of all, we leaped from the rooftop antenna to DTH and cable. We skipped the steps in between. From there, now we have leaped to the world of smartphones, and everyone is consuming content on their phones. There was a time when dinner would be in front of the television. Now dinner is everyone looking at their phone. And practically nobody is talking to each other at dinner table, right? And so that is the extent to which the world has changed. And in that environment, how do we remain relevant? So these were top of mind questions. So the way I see D2M, and I think Chairman Trai Vagelaji put it very well, that this is a disruptive technology. And that is the reason why it's so important for us, that the disruptive potential of this technology, because it can put us ahead of the curve rather than always being behind the curve.
Interesting take. I think we should have a technology to get back everybody to the dinner table, probably. I think in that sense, we should not be disruptive enough. In some sense, I mean, talking about your investments earlier in DD, there have been efforts earlier on direct to mobile, I think, in 2005. There's been substantial investments on the DTT. based on your experience and based on what you see, what do you think is a roadmap for D2M and generally convergence?
So I think the investments in the past were with a very siloed way of thinking. And that is the reason why they never took off, because as you know, as was pointed out by multiple speakers in the last session, we have so many silos of legislation, of regulation, of licensing. So in that environment, when we did, let's say, mobile broadcasting based on the DVP standards back then, there was no ecosystem because nobody was thinking ecosystem. Nobody was thinking, you know, how will this reach consumers? Because consumers today want everything on their, common devices. They don't want, silos of hardware in their homes anymore, because it's the apps are very easy and convenient to access on, their iPad or iPhone or Android phone and so on. So I think that is the key difference, that the investments of the past were on very closed ecosystem, legacy technologies, which did not extend to a whole range of applications. I think what is different now is that you have the potential to build on this stack, add multiple applications, create an open ecosystem, and that is how usage will take off. Otherwise, the usage will never take off, and we'll always be stuck with the catch-22 of, do you invest in the technology or do you wait for consumer adoption? We have to break that, and I think that requires an open approach, and I think that is what this has the potential for.
That's again quite interesting. That brings us to, you spoke about the challenges. What do you think are the challenges and risks? One of them that I think somebody in the audience already raised, and how do you create a wider device ecosystem and get other key stakeholders like the mobile operators and potentially other use cases for broadcast as a service?
I think that will be the biggest challenge, right? How do we bring everyone on board, and how do we ensure that there are no barriers in realizing this roadmap? One of them will be what was pointed out in the previous session, the stress on the telecom networks. I think that automatically creates one use case for us, which would create the foundation on which D2M can stand, because it is increasingly difficult to live stream big events at scale in the current manner and current way in which you're doing it. So I think that is one scenario. The other scenario, I think, which will be very important for a country like India, and we've seen this during COVID-19. There were multiple instances where you had to get the message out to everyone, especially during the lockdown, that, what is happening, what needs to be done, what are the do's and don'ts. Every time the Prime Minister took stage and addressed the nation, it was to get this message out. But then you are limited by, the reach of traditional TV networks. I was looking at the stats. The overall TV universe during the COVID period, when several broadcasts of national importance were done, reached only about 20 crore individuals. Right? You're only talking of 200 million. And then on the internet side, it is perhaps even lesser. It'll probably be a few million. And on the internet side, the other challenge is you are at the mercy of the platforms and the algorithms, right? So these two are limiting factors. Now, potentially you had the ability to directly reach every phone during a crisis, be it COVID-19, be it a war, be it any kind of a national emergency. You don't want to be dependent on some third-party platform anywhere. And we've seen that now recently during the Ukraine-Russia conflict as well, that sovereign nations cannot be at the mercy of third-party platforms. And so it becomes very important for a country like India, a sovereign democracy, one of the largest markets in the world, to have this kind of a strategic ability, that to be able to get the right information to the citizens, irrespective of the platforms, irrespective of algorithms, without being limited by legacy technologies. So I think that is what will eventually drive the adoption.
Interesting. I think the Ramayana part of it, the rebroadcast of Ramayana actually got a lot of people together and also made them nostalgic. I think, where do you see the fact that mostly PB is looking at linear content, linear broad content, and there's a lot of other broadcasters who are moving away to non-linear OTT platforms. How do you think these two ways of delivery of service will exist, and what are your plans in Prasar Bharati for any OTT non-linear content delivery?
This is, I think, one of the challenges practically every broadcaster is facing, right? What are you doing on OTT? How do you scale on OTT? And if we go by the conventional approach that everyone is taken, then we are talking of huge investments on cloud media infrastructure, storage, on content delivery networks. And these are all domains which are alien to the broadcast engineering community, right? So how do you make that transition? So either you invest heavily on these OTT platforms and then hope to recover that through subscription revenues. But that is not going to be easy. If you look at what Netflix is struggling right now, there is no cookie cutter formula there, and especially for a legacy broadcaster to go down that path is even that much more challenging. So that is where I think this gives us a different fork for us, that while we use platforms like YouTube or the News on Air app, which was earlier referred to, in the interim, I think in the long term we would want the broadcast spectrum to be the content delivery network, and I think that is where the broadcast as a service comes in. So that would be our ultimate approach to OTT. Of course, there will still be on-demand consumption of media, and to that extent, you would still need to have the conventional OTT capabilities. But a whole lot more live content, especially a public broadcaster, which does live coverages every day, which delivers news every day, which is of national importance. To us, the live element will always be more important than the on-demand element. So it will be a combination of D2M plus OTT, I would think, in the long term.
Yeah, and I think in the inaugural session, I think there's mention of democratizing of platforms. I think you also said that, and also democratizing of the content. A lot of small OTT players. I mean, given the diversity in India, anybody who wants to build a OTT service actually needs to do a lot of content generation. And even if he does get content right, you have to have distribution. Are you envisaging, an open platform for content creation and delivery?
I think it's very much in the realm of possibilities. If you look at DD Fredish DTH today, it's become a great enabler of competitiveness. It's an open free-to-air platform. Any broadcaster can participate on it, big or small. And it has immense reach, more than 4 crore households. Now that has been a great enabler of competitiveness. You have small and upcoming channels challenging the larger incumbents. And today, if you look at your TV ratings in the top 10 entertainment channels, there are multiple channels which are small channels which came on free dish and are able to, stand shoulder to shoulder to the bigger channels, right? So in that sense, having a free-to-air platform opens up, the possibility to smaller players. So I would think that even whatever we do with D2M should create such a level playing field where upstarts can challenge the incumbents, and ultimately the consumer benefits, from choice. So that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, I think that's now coming to the bit of the technology part of it. I mean, D2M is primarily step away from your typical high tower transmission, retransmission from satellites to a cloud native IP delivery services. So what operational challenges do you foresee in implementing such a platform? Given the fact that people like Netflix and Amazon, I think recently we had issues even with Amazon or one of those OTT players. What are the operational challenges do you foresee there?
I think the first biggest challenge is skill sets, right? Traditional broadcasting engineers have grown up with a certain kind of technical expertise. With hardware and the world of wireless and so on. Now to go from there to media and cloud-based media, that's a big shift. So one of the things that we've been doing since we have phased out our analog terrestrial transmitters is to retrain and reskill engineers so that they can pick up, software skills, digital media skills. So that is, I think, one big, operational change that has to happen. Second is, what kind of infrastructure do you invest in, right? You mentioned towers. So towers is the legacy image of a broadcaster. In the future, we probably will invest in data centers because that will become very, very important, right? Because we'll have so much of content that will be, sitting on the cloud. Today, we are all at the mercy of third-party platforms, and many of those servers don't even reside in India. We can't do that going forward. So perhaps the other big operational area of change that would happen maybe in the next decade is, data centers and native cloud that we build on the broadcast infrastructure.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Again, a bit away from the technology, given the fact that you have been a legacy broadcaster and you have a dual responsibility of a public broadcaster and also operational self-sufficiency as an independent broadcaster. What are the business models and use cases that you think would drive D2M into scale?
So one example I've already given, which is DD Free Dish, right? Where you have an open platform and you have slots on that platform. In this case, it'll probably be bandwidth, and multiple channels or broadcasters can bid for that capacity and they can place their content. So that is one model. But I think that is still a very rigid, linear mindset model. While if you look at the world of streaming, you can have a stream on demand, right? You could have multiple streams. Today I see several news channels, for example, take Aaj Tak. They have their regular TV channels, but if you look at what they're doing on the digital side, it's very interesting. They have hyper-localized content and they have multiple live streams. And that is the potential future, right? So a new business model would be, being able to provision on-demand live capacity so you can stream on to, mobiles directly. And that could be event-specific. Maybe it's just a cricket match. Just for that match, you create a dedicated stream. In fact, this happens in the US quite often. I've not seen it in India, strangely, where you can do pay-per-view. If there's a big-ticket boxing game, you can just buy a pass just to watch that, or you just buy a pass to watch your NFL, league matches, or Premier League baseball, and so on, right? So that kind of very personalized, on-demand viewing of live events can potentially happen. That's a different, business model. Third could be where you're offloading the traffic from the OTT platforms onto the broadcast infrastructure. So that is again, that can happen on an on-demand basis. So that is another use case. What would also be interesting is new kinds of broadcasts, which are probably not happening today and may likely happen in the future. As we see more and more of devices and the Internet of Things, broadcasting will need not be only limited to video and audio. It can be a whole lot of data. So data broadcasting could be another service. So I think these are all potential use cases that can contribute to a business model. And I don't think we have figured out all of this. I don't think all the answers are there. What you probably need is an open ecosystem. Let the market forces, determine it.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the US and generally in telecom, there's this concept of sharing of infrastructure now, sharing of fiber assets, and also sharing of spectrum. US has this CBRS scheme where multiple unlicensed scheme, just like Wi-Fi, that you can share spectrum. Now, what you're talking about is very interesting because you could take that sharing to the next level through this free dish model, where you don't necessarily share spectrum but share slots, and that could be a very interesting model for model and also an initiative for TRI to be able to figure out for the next sessions on how to share spectrum. This could probably be another innovation in the D2M part. Now, generally on the importance of D2M, and why do you think this think it's been touched upon, but I would like to know from your perspective, why is it so important? Why do you think it is important for the country?
So let me give an example. This was back in the late 2000s. I recall when the current Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. A very interesting phenomenon. What I've observed with him is he's not afraid of experimenting with technology. And what he did in the late 2000s was very interesting, where he no longer depended on traditional media to get his message out. He started live streaming on YouTube. And that was perhaps the first time, you started seeing speeches being, done on YouTube. So that no matter where he goes, what event he is, you could always keep track of it. And then sometime early in the next decade, that is 2011-12, I'm forgetting which month, he experimented with a Google Hangout, which was perhaps the first time some political leader or someone in office, public office, was interacting directly with people using an interactive digital platform. And I recall that day when he did this Google Hangout, the servers of YouTube India crashed for almost half an hour, so they had to start half an hour late. So that was the kind of, so what happened there in this whole phenomenon was you disintermediated the traditional media and you reached out to the public directly with digital media. Now we fast forward to this decade. What we are now seeing is that this process of disintermediation of traditional media has put enormous power into the platforms. Today the platforms with their algorithms, which are very opaque, are calling the shots. And you saw that during the elections in the United States. You saw that during the Ukraine-Russia conflict, where it is very easy to deplatform a point of view. It's very easy to block a point of view. So I think that we cannot allow this going forward. As a sovereign country, I think it's very important that the nation should have the ability to get its message out. So I see that the potential is ripe for the next wave of disintermediation, where the platforms and the algorithms will get disintermediated by direct-to-mobile broadcasting. I think the potential exists. It is very disruptive. I'm very glad that Chairman Trai recognized that disruptive potential. Now it is for the country, all the policy makers to come together and make this happen.
Maybe you outsource or open source even the algorithms that run the platform. Maybe that's the way to go forward.
I don't have all the answers, but I think, in fact, that's one area of regulation which I think India should seriously look at. We should take a leadership position. The other reason why D2M is important to India, in fact, I missed saying this earlier, as the largest democracy, the biggest market, we have the power of the market and we have not leveraged it effectively. One of the reasons when I initially looked at DTT and what we were doing, I was stunned that all the patents, all the intellectual property underlying DVB-T2, for example, or any of the other standards, is all owned by foreign broadcasters. Here I'm spending thousands of crores. What is the value I've delivered to the country, where all the royalties have accrued to other broadcasters? So I think it's very important that India seriously looks at intellectual property, create India-based standards, make them part of the global family. And I think as the public broadcaster, which has put in so much of investment into this technology space, I think it's very important that we create this IP in India. And I think that is exactly what the Prime Minister's vision is as well of an Atmanirbhar Bharat and indigenous technology.
Interesting that you say that. I think you've seen the demos of the POCs, and what do you think strikes you the most, and what is your assessment in terms of large rollout from PB and other?
Yeah. I think we've come a long way, right? Because earlier it was big tablets, big clunky dongles. From there, now you come to an embedded chip. Where we perhaps need to be is ubiquitous capability in all smartphones, which perhaps will take some time, because you'll have to get on board all the device manufacturers. But we'll have to look at smart interim solutions. So a Wi-Fi gateway is perhaps a good interim solution. I know CDOT has demonstrated a Wi-Fi gateway. So we'll have to look at very smart solutions which can, bridge the gap till we get mass, adoption going. And mandate, of course, will be very helpful. That is one of the key recommendations of the white paper as well. That mandate for, be it public content or content of national importance. I think that will drive a lot of the adoption as well. We already have a mandate on the cable and satellite side with mandatory carriage, but that's going to become increasingly less and less relevant because nobody's watching TV, traditional cable or DTH. So that mandatory carriage is of, not of that significance going forward. So we will need an equivalent in the D2M world. So I think a combination of these two will drive adoption.
All right. Now, a cliched question. I mean, what has been the impact of COVID or on acceleration of D2M or your thought processes, especially in terms of, national emergencies that you just spoke about? How does that impact D2M?
I think the best example is education. During the lockdown, when schools were not happening and the elite schools, the elite families, of course, managed it with high-speed internet at home and easy availability of computing desktops and so on to do online classes. But the vast masses had a huge challenge. And that's where DD Free Dish as a platform came to the aid. We had, you had multiple educational channels, both regular DD channels as well as channels operated by the Department of Education. All of them were delivering on, content which kept the school education going. So the way I see D2M playing a role in the future is that it's not only about disaster management, it's not only about emergency alerts or national broadcasts, but education in a country like India. I think D2M can be a great enabler and a game changer there.
I agree with. I think the budget this year also has very specific allocation and mention of that, I believe, right, for education purposes. Yeah, and I've had a personal experience with that. While most operators claim that you got infinite capacity, I mean, after 2 GB, their plans kind of stabilize. So effectively, I've seen you have to pay about 800 to 1,000 rupees per child per month, and the prices are really going to go northwards on on the data plans. However cheap we are. Now coming to the next one, that you spoke about the operational challenges. We spoke about the technology challenges. I mean, the technology is now right for scaling. What policy or regulatory gaps do you think we need to overcome or should be in place to see D2M at scale?
Yeah, I think the chairman spoke about it very well, that you have so many domains of regulation and so many different boundaries, all of which need to be bridged and crossed as this convergence happens. So from a regulatory standpoint, one is of course spectrum, making sure that spectrum is available in whatever form, whether it is reserved or collaborative or but spectrum has to be ensured. So we have a terrestrial fallback. Today, I mean, unfortunately in India, or fortunately, the growth of satellite and cable has been such that we skipped this whole interim step of digital terrestrial. But no other country has done this. So having a terrestrial fallback is also a strategic imperative for the country. And because there could be catastrophic failure of satellites, you never know, right? So to that extent, I think the regulatory thought process has to ensure availability of spectrum and a basic terrestrial capability still continuing in India in whatever form. How to make it financially self-sustaining is a different aspect. We'll have to figure that out. And then having these mandatory provisions for content of public importance, national importance. And then some seed capital to trigger this, because you need to initially seed the ecosystem. That's what happened with Free Dish, right? When the then NDA government led by Atal Bihari Vajpayee, they had the foresight to invest in the necessary infrastructure for Free Dish. But that was a one-time investment. After that, the whole model was such that it became financially self-sustaining. And today it has grown to what it has become. So I think something similar will also be required as an intervention. So I think combination of these interventions, I think, should help it take off.
Interesting. So then what happens to your existing DTT investments, given the fact that we're going to roll out D2M? What happens to that?
I think we have to find ways creatively to leverage it. The 19 cities where we have these 23 transmitters and the towers, I think those should be the initial focus. How do we adapt them for D2M? I think that is the first challenge, and that should, require a lot of out-of-the-box thinking, because it's very easy to say, rip apart everything that you have and again, spend money on new infrastructure. I don't think that is the way to go. We have to find ways of getting value of the investments, public investment that we've already made, and find a bridge solution to D2M, so that in 19 cities we have this in place, and then we think of the next wave of how this will be expanded.
I think taking on your earlier question on why we don't contribute to IP standards, what is your take on standardization and generally IP creation?
I think that's a very significant point you've raised. With 5G, the phenomenal work that has been done on 5GI with the IITs and TSDSI, bringing the standards as part of the global family of standards. I think that's something that we'll have to do for D2M as well. I'm also reminded of how wireless LANs and 802.11b became Wi-Fi. Today, nobody talks 802.11, you talk about Wi-Fi. Right? And that was not something that just happened on day one. There was a consortium, there's a industry body that came together and said, we need to have a ubiquitous experience. And that ubiquitous experience is what is Wi-Fi today. Today, you don't think about how do I discover Wi-Fi, right? It's a standard capability that is consistently found on laptops, on smartphones, iPhones, any device, or even smart TVs for that matter, right? So that kind of ubiquity of experience is something we'll have to create and define for D2M. That also requires a standard, and that also requires global, adoption. So it's not just limited to the technology, the radio part, that is important. But ultimately, when you want consumer adoption, and Secretary INB raised this very well, that ultimately from a consumer standpoint, the experience matters. And for that experience, we have to have a ubiquitous way in which we discover these services, and that has to become a standard across platforms, device platforms.
Interesting. So eventually we would see an icon for D2M like Wi-Fi does. Right?
Absolutely. In fact, you put it in airplane mode, you should still find that service.
Yeah. Interesting. It's interesting in some sense that we are debuting this technology along with other other countries in the world. How important? I think you touched upon it, but how important do you think it is for international collaboration for the D2M part?
I don't think we have a choice there. We have to do it. I think glad that ATSC and ETRI from Korea are here today. We'll have to take this across multilateral bodies. So recently at one of the events organized by the Asia Pacific Broadcast Union, in fact I had shared this as well, that Japan has had its approach to standards, China has its approach to standards, but the Asia Pacific broadcast community has never taken an initiative towards a common standard, or at least a common family of technology. So I think that is something that we will definitely push. Luckily this year, it's not only 75 years of independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, it is also 25 years of Prasar Bharati. We will be hosting the Asia Pacific Broadcast Union's General Assembly in Delhi. So that would be a good opportunity for us to put this out to the entire broadcast community, that how can we come together and champion this as a community initiative.
Parag sir, now since the time is limiting, sir,
if one last one, okay. Your final thoughts on Atmanirbhar Bharat?
I think we need more startups, more innovation in this. It took us a while to get even our own people to embrace this idea that you can't solve everything within your four walls. You have to open it up. You have to collaborate, bring startups in. I think working with IIT Kanpur that way was a great first step. We need to broaden this, bring in more innovation and more participation across India at all levels of the stack, not just the core technology, but the application interface, the algorithms, and who knows what new things will come up. I don't think we've fully thought through what the potential is of this technology.
Yeah, thank you, Shashi. And since we have lack of time, I thought we would have some 5-10 minutes for questions from the audience, but maybe we are around here. We can, during lunchtime informally chat up. Thank you. It was interesting, and I hope this sets the context for the rest of the sessions to follow. Thank you.
Thank you.